My father missed my wedding because he was vacationing in the Maldives on my dime. But when my hotel chain hit a $600 million valuation, he suddenly texted family dinner urgent. I thought he wanted to apologize or perhaps ask for a loan. Instead, he slid a conservatorship paper across the mahogany table and told me to sign over my life or go to a psych ward. He did not know that the eviction notice for his mansion was already sitting in my glove compartment. Before I tell you how I bought my own father's debt and evicted him from his high horse, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind your family that you are not the one to mess with. My name is Simone Banks, and I am 35 years old. Walking into my parents' estate in Buckhead always felt like walking into a mausoleum. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that chilled you to the bone, and the smell of expensive lilies was suffocating. It was a house designed to impress strangers while freezing out the people who lived there. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. My tailored charcoal suit was sharp. My hair was pulled back in a severe, efficient bun. I looked like the CEO of the Onyx collection. I looked like a woman who commanded respect in boardrooms from Tokyo to London. But as I approached the dining room, I felt that old familiar knot tighten in my stomach. The revert to childhood. The feeling of being the unwanted mistake. Reginald Banks sat at the head of the table. He was wearing a three-piece suit inside his own home on a Tuesday night. That was my father. Appearance over substance. Always. He did not stand up to greet me. He did not smile. He did not ask how my drive was, or how my husband David was doing. He simply gestured to the empty chair to his right with a flick of his wrist. "Sit down, Simone." The command was quiet, but absolute. I sat. The china on the table was Versace, but the plates were empty. There was no food, just a single manila folder resting in front of my father's place setting. To his left sat my sister Chantel scrolling on her phone, and next to her was her husband Kyle, my brother-in-law. The man who had never held a steady job for more than 6 months yet always had an opinion on how I should run my empire. My mother Louise sat at the far end staring blankly at the floral centerpiece. She looked like a ghost in her own home, a silent accomplice to whatever ambush was about to happen. I placed my clutch on the table. "I assumed this was important, Dad. I canceled a meeting with the investors from Dubai to be here." Reginald did not look at me. He picked up the manila folder and let it drop onto the table. The heavy thud echoed in the silent room. It slid across the polished wood and stopped inches from my hands. "We need to talk about the future of the Onyx collection, Simone. And we need to talk about your health." I frowned. My health is fine. My quarterly physical was perfect. And the company has never been stronger. We just posted a 20% growth in Q3. Kyle cleared his throat. He swirled his glass of red wine, acting as if he were a sommelier inspecting a vintage rather than a man drinking a bottle I had likely paid for. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. The entitlement in his posture made my skin crawl. "See, that is the problem, Simone. You are focusing on short-term numbers. You are not looking at the macro stability of the brand." I stared at him. "Excuse me, Kyle. Since when do you have any expertise in hospitality management? Last I checked, your venture into artisan coffee shops ended in bankruptcy after 4 months." Kyle laughed, a condescending sound that grated on my nerves. "Do not get defensive, sweetheart. It is unbecoming. We are just concerned. You have been working 80-hour weeks. You are erratic. You are emotional. A company valued at $600 million needs a steady hand at the wheel. It needs strategic vision, not feminine intuition." I felt the heat rise up my neck. Feminine intuition. I had built Onyx from a single dilapidated bed and breakfast into a global luxury brand while Kyle was playing video games in my sister's basement. I turned to my father. "Is this a joke? You brought me here to listen to Kyle lecture me on business." Reginald finally looked at me. His eyes were cold, hard flint. "It is not a lecture, Simone. It is an intervention." Chantel finally looked up from her phone. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in disgust. Look at you, Simone. You look like a man. That suit is hideous. You are 35 and you dress like a funeral director. It is bad for the brand image. The Onyx collection is supposed to be about luxury and beauty and lifestyle. You are depressing. You are clearly having a breakdown. I laughed. A short, sharp sound of disbelief. A breakdown, because I wear a suit to work. Because I actually work instead of posing for Instagram photos with rented handbags like you do, Chantel. My mother flinched at the volume of my voice, but she said nothing. She just picked up her spoon and began stirring the air in her empty bowl. Reginald slammed his hand on the table. Enough. This denial is exactly why we had to take steps. He pointed a manicured finger at the folder. Open it. I hesitated. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from hostile to dangerous. My instincts were screaming at me to run, but I needed to know what they were planning. I flipped the folder open. The first document was a medical evaluation. Dr. Arrington, a name I recognized. He was the family doctor who prescribed my mother her happy pills and signed whatever my father put in front of him for the right price. I scanned the lines. Bipolar disorder with manic episodes, paranoia, unable to make sound financial decisions, threat to self and others. My hands started to shake. This was fiction, pure malicious fiction. I looked up. This is a lie. I have not seen Dr. Arrington in 10 years. He cannot diagnose me. Reginald took a sip of his water. He has reviewed your behavior. The erratic spending, the aggression toward your family, the obsession with work. It is a clear pattern, Simone. And for your own good, we cannot let you destroy yourself or the family legacy. Family legacy. I almost choked. The only legacy Reginald Banks had was a string of failed investments and a talent for spending money he did not earn. Underneath the medical report was a legal document, durable power of attorney, and a transfer of control agreement. It transferred 51% of my voting shares in the Onyx collection to a trust managed by Reginald Banks and Kyle Jensen. I pushed the folder back. I am not signing this. You are insane if you think I would ever sign this. Kyle smiled. It was a predator smile. We thought you might say that. That is why we have a backup plan. Reginald leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper that was more terrifying than a scream. You have two choices tonight, Simone. Choice A is you sign those papers voluntarily. You step down as CEO citing health reasons. We will give you a generous allowance. You can go to a spa in Arizona. Relax. Be a wife. Let the men handle the heavy lifting. And choice B. I asked, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. Reginald checked his watch. Choice B is that Dr. Arrington is waiting in the library with two orderlies from the Oak Creek Mental Health Facility. Based on his assessment of your imminent danger to yourself, I have petitioned the court for an emergency temporary conservatorship. If you do not sign that transfer voluntarily, I will have you committed tonight. You will be sedated. You will be locked away. And by the time you manage to get a lawyer from inside a padded room, Kyle and I will already have legal control of the company as your guardians. The room spun. This was not just greed. This was evil. They were willing to lock me away, to drug me, to strip me of my human rights just to get their hands on my bank accounts. I looked at my mother. Mom, are you hearing this? They are talking about putting me in a mental institution. My mother did not look up. Her voice was a whisper. It is for your own good, Simone. You are just too much. You always have been. Just sign the papers, baby. Please. Do not make your father angry. I looked at the door. Two large men in dark suits had quietly stepped into the dining room entrance. They were not my father's usual security. They were hired muscle. If I tried to run, they would grab me. If I screamed, they would say I was having an episode. I was trapped. I needed to think. I needed to breathe. If I fought them now, I would lose. I would wake up in a facility heavily medicated, and my company would be gone. I had to play their game. I took a deep breath. I forced my shoulders to relax. I looked down at the papers and then up at my father. I let a tear fall. It was not hard. I was terrified. Okay. Kyle clapped his hands together. See? I told you she would be reasonable. But, I added quickly, raising a hand, I cannot sign this tonight. Not like this. Reginald narrowed his eyes. Why not? Because this transfer involves public shares, Dad. If I sign this on a napkin at a dinner table, the SEC will flag it. The stock will tank. You will lose millions in valuation overnight. It needs to be done properly. Notarized. With the corporate lawyers present. I saw the greed flicker in Kyle's eyes. The mention of losing millions scared him. She is right, Reginald. We need the transition to be clean. I pressed my advantage, my voice trembling just enough to sound defeated. The gala. The 40th anniversary gala on Saturday. All the investors will be there. The legal team will be there. I will announce my resignation there. I will introduce you and Kyle as the new leadership. It will stabilize the stock. It will look like a planned succession, not a hostile takeover. Reginald studied my face. He was looking for the defiance, the fire. But I had buried it deep. All he saw was a broken daughter. Saturday, he said slowly. That is 48 hours away. I nodded. I just need 2 days, Dad. To pack my things at the office. To say goodbye to my staff. Please, just let me leave with some dignity. Then I will go to the facility if you want. Or the spa. Whatever you say. Reginald sat back. He waved his hand at the guards by the door. They stepped aside. Fine. Saturday night. But Simone, listen to me clearly. If you try to run, if you try to move any money, if you call the police, I will have Dr. Arrington sign that commitment order so fast your head will spin. We are watching you. I understand, I whispered. I stood up. My legs felt like jelly. I picked up my clutch. I left the folder on the table. I walked toward the door. Every step was a battle against the urge to sprint. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. Kyle whispered something to Chantel and she giggled. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken the wild horse. I walked out of the front door and into the humid Georgia night. The valet brought my car around. I got into the driver's seat of my Mercedes. I did not start the engine immediately. I locked the doors. Only then did I let out the scream that had been building in my chest for the last hour. A primal, guttural sound of rage. I looked back at the house looming in the darkness. They wanted a war. They wanted to take everything I built. They wanted to declare me insane. I wiped my face. I put the car in gear. They gave me 48 hours to say goodbye. Big mistake, because 48 hours was exactly enough time to burn their entire world to the ground. I pulled out of the driveway and dialed the number for Marcus, my private investigator. I did not care what time it was. Marcus, I said, my voice ice cold. I want you to find out who my father owes money to. Every cent. And Marcus? I want to buy the debt. Reginald Banks wanted to play games with ownership. He was about to find out that I was the one holding the deed to his destruction. The tires of my Mercedes screeched against the asphalt as I peeled out of the driveway, leaving the suffocating air of my parents' estate behind me. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned the color of ash. I drove without a destination in mind, just needing to put miles between myself and the people who shared my DNA. The streetlights of Buckhead blurred into streaks of amber and white, but I barely saw them. Instead, my vision was clouded by a memory I had tried to bury for 2 years. It was the day I married David. It should have been the happiest day of my life. I had spent months planning every detail, ensuring the ceremony at the Botanic Gardens would be perfect. I remembered standing in the bridal suite, staring at myself in the mirror, wearing a gown of ivory silk that cost more than my first car. I looked beautiful, but I felt hollow. 10 minutes before the music was set to start, My phone had buzzed on the vanity table. I picked it up expecting a text from my father, saying he was on his way to walk me down the aisle. Instead, I saw a photo. It was a selfie of my father and Chantel, holding cocktails on a white sand beach. The caption read, simply, Maldives. Underneath came a text from my father. Something came up with Chantel and she needed a getaway. You are strong, Simone, you understand. I did not understand. I stood there alone in that room, realizing that my father had chosen a vacation with his golden child over giving away his scapegoat daughter. I walked down that aisle alone. I held my head high and I smiled for the cameras, but inside something fractured permanently. That was the day I stopped seeking their approval and started building my armor. Now 2 years later, driving through the dark streets of Atlanta, that fracture had become a chasm. They did not just want to neglect me anymore. They wanted to erase me. The threat of the conservatorship replayed in my mind like a broken record. They wanted to paint me as unstable. They wanted to use my ambition, my drive, and my refusal to tolerate their disrespect as symptoms of a mental illness. I merged onto the highway, pressing the accelerator until the speedometer climbed well past the legal limit. I was not running away from them. I was racing toward my war room. If they wanted to claim I was crazy, I would show them exactly how calculated a crazy woman could be. I did not go home to David that night. I went straight to my penthouse office at the Onyx headquarters. I needed to be surrounded by the empire I built. I needed to remember who I was. The sun rose over the Atlanta skyline, casting a harsh gray light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. I had not slept. I had spent the night reviewing every legal loophole regarding conservatorships, but nothing prepared me for the digital assault that greeted me with the morning coffee. My assistant Sarah walked in, and her face was pale. She did not say a word, she just placed her tablet on my desk and backed away as if it were a bomb. I looked down. It was a live stream replay from Instagram. Chantel. She was sitting in her kitchen wearing no makeup, which was a calculated move for someone who usually would not check the mail without false lashes. Her eyes were red and puffy. She looked into the camera with a vulnerability that would have won an Oscar. "Hey guys," she whispered, wiping away a fake tear. "I know I usually post about fashion and travel, but today I have to get real with you all. My family is going through a really hard time. It is my sister, Simone." I felt a cold spike of adrenaline hit my chest. I tapped the screen to turn up the volume. "You guys know she runs the Onyx collection?" Chantel continued, her voice cracking perfectly. "But what you do not know is the pressure she has been under. She has not been herself lately. We found things in her apartment, pills, and she has been seeing things that are not there. It is just so heartbreaking to watch someone you love lose their grip on reality." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Chantel had never set foot in my apartment. The only pills I took were multivitamins, but the comments section was scrolling by so fast it was a blur of neon text. "Praying for your family, Chantel. Rich people always have the darkest secrets. I stayed at an Onyx hotel last month and the service was weird. Maybe the CEO is losing it. Is she dangerous? Hope you guys stay safe." My sister was systematically dismantling my reputation in real time. She was planting the seeds of public opinion so that when my father filed the paperwork for the conservatorship, the world would nod and say, "Yes, we saw this coming." It was brilliant and it was vile. She was weaponizing her following against me, using their parasocial relationship to validate her lies. I watched as she held up a bottle of prescription medication to the camera. It was blurry, but the implication was clear. She was accusing me of substance abuse. "We are trying to get her help," Chantel sobbed. "My dad is doing everything he can to save her and the company, but she is fighting us. We just want our sister back." The video ended. I sat there in the silence of my office, feeling the walls closing in. This was not just a family spat anymore. This was a coordinated PR campaign designed to destroy my credibility before I could even defend myself. My phone started buzzing, then the office line, then my personal cell again. It was a cacophony of noise demanding my attention. I looked at the stock ticker I had running on the wall monitor. The Onyx collection was down 4% in pre-market trading. That was millions of dollars in valuation evaporating because my sister decided to play the victim for clout. My email pinged with a notification from the board of directors. Subject line: emergency meeting regarding CEO stability. Then the phone rang again. It was the private line, the one only major investors had. I picked it up, my voice steady, despite the rage boiling in my veins. Simone Banks speaking. Simone, this is Arthur from the investment group. Arthur, good morning. To what do I owe the pleasure? Cut the crap, Simone. I just saw your sister's video. Are you using? Because if there is a drug problem we need to know before the shareholders' meeting, we cannot have a liability at the helm. I gripped the receiver. Arthur, you know me. You know I built this company from the ground up. My sister is a desperate influencer looking for content. There are no drugs. There is no breakdown. There is smoke. Simone. Arthur said, his voice cold. And where there is smoke, investors get nervous. We are putting a hold on the expansion funding until this is resolved. Fix your family, or we will fix the leadership. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the receiver. Fix my family. As if they were a leaky faucet, and not a pack of wolves encircling me. The buzzing of my cell phone on the glass desk became unbearable. It was vibrating against the surface like an angry hornet. Every notification was another insult, another lie, another person asking if I was okay when the reality was I was being hunted. I looked at the phone. It was the latest model, sleek and expensive. It contained my schedule, my contacts, my life. But right now, it was just a portal for their poison. I stood up and grabbed the phone. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply wound up my arm and threw it as hard as I could against the far wall. The glass shattered with a satisfying crunch. The screen went black. The buzzing stopped. For a moment, I just breathed. The silence was beautiful. I was done reacting. I was done defending myself against fiction. If they wanted to tell stories, I would find the truth. I walked over to the landline on my desk. I dialed a number I had memorized years ago, but hoped never to use. It rang twice. Marcus Investigations. Marcus. It is Simone Banks. Simone. I saw the video. You want me to find dirt on Chantel? No. I said, looking out at the city that tried to break me. Chantel is a puppet. I want the puppet master. I want you to look into my father and Kyle. What exactly am I looking for? Money, Marcus. I want to know where every cent is going. I want to know why my father is suddenly so desperate to control my company that he would frame me for insanity. Rich men do not steal from their children unless they are drowning. Find out who is holding his head under water. I will get on it. It might take a few days. You have 24 hours, I said. Charge me double, triple. I do not care. Just find the leak. I hung up the phone. I looked at the shattered remains of my cell phone on the floor. It lay in pieces just like my relationship with my family. I smoothed down my suit jacket. They thought they had cornered a frightened animal. They forgot that when you corner a predator, you do not get surrender. You get teeth. I sat back down at my desk and pulled a fresh legal pad toward me. I picked up a pen. Step 1, stabilize the investors. Step 2, expose the debt. Step 3, eviction. My hand moved across the paper, steady and sure. The tears I had shed in the car were the last ones they would ever get from me. The grieving daughter was gone. The CEO was back at work. And business was about to be brutal. The silence in my office following the call with Marcus was short-lived. I was in the middle of reviewing the quarterly revenue projections when the intercom on my desk buzzed with a frantic urgency that I had never heard from my reception staff before. Usually, the lobby of the Onyx Collection headquarters was a sanctuary of hushed tones and soft jazz, a reflection of the luxury experience we sold to our clients. But today, even through the heavy mahogany doors, I could hear a voice raised in anger. A voice I recognized instantly. It was the nasal, entitled baritone of my brother-in-law, Kyle. I pressed the button on the intercom, and my receptionist, Nia, spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "Miss Banks, I am so sorry, but there is a man here. He says he is your business partner, and he is refusing to wait." Before I could even respond, the door to my office flew open with such force that it slammed against the wall, leaving a dent in the expensive plaster. Kyle stood there breathing hard, his face flushed a blotchy red that clashed with his pastel polo shirt. He looked completely out of place against the backdrop of sleek black marble and modern African art that defined my workspace. He walked in not like a guest, but like a landlord inspecting a property he intended to condemn. I watched as he ignored me at first, turning his attention to a sculpture by a renowned Nigerian artist that stood on a pedestal near the entrance. It was a delicate piece worth more than the house Kyle lived in. He reached out and tapped it with his knuckle, the sound echoing sharply in the tense room. "Nice little trinket," he sneered, looking at me with eyes that held no respect, only a predatory calculation. "I see you are spending company profits on jungle decor instead of reinvesting in the infrastructure." He walked further into the room, his shoes squeaking on the hardwood floor. Outside in the hallway, I could see Nia and two other employees standing frozen, their eyes wide with shock. Kyle turned to them and waved a hand dismissively as if shooing away flies. "Get back to work," he barked at them. "And someone get me a sparkling water, the expensive kind, not the tap water you probably drink at home." Nia looked at me for permission, and I gave her a subtle nod to retreat. I did not want my staff witnessing what was about to happen. Kyle kicked the door shut with his heel and turned his full attention to me. He began to pace around the room, picking up crystal paperweights and glancing at documents on my desk with a violation of privacy that made my skin crawl. He acted as if the transfer of power had already happened. He acted as if I were already a memory in this room, and he was measuring the space for his own oversized ego. I remained seated behind my desk, my hands folded calmly on top of the revenue reports. I did not stand up. I did not offer him a seat. I simply watched him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen that was about to dissect itself. Kyle stopped pacing and leaned over my desk, invading my personal space with the smell of stale coffee and aggressive cologne. He placed both hands on the glass surface, leaving greasy fingerprints on the pristine finish. "We need to talk about the transition, Simone," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made my stomach turn. "Your father is too sentimental to say it, but we need to start liquidating some of these assets immediately." I raised an eyebrow slowly. "Liquidating. That is an interesting choice of words, Kyle. Onyx is a growth brand. We are acquiring properties, not selling them. Why would we need to liquidate anything unless the new management is in financial trouble?" Kyle stood up straight, his jaw clenching. He walked over to the window, looking down at the bustling streets of Atlanta. When he turned back, his mask of concern slipped, revealing the ugly prejudice underneath. "Look, let us be honest here. You have had your fun running this little diversity project, but real money, real corporate power, that requires a different touch. You have filled these hotels with urban art and culture. It is too niche. It scares away the old money, the secure money." He gestured vaguely at the room. "When I take over, we are going to strip all this down, make it cleaner, more European. We can sell off these art pieces for a quick injection of cash." "I have looked at the books, Simone. This building alone sits on prime real estate. If we sell the ground floor retail rights, we could generate 10 million in liquid cash by next week." There it was. The slip-up. The desperation. He did not care about the brand. He did not care about legacy or European aesthetics. He needed $10 million by next week. A successful businessman taking over a thriving empire does not talk about selling off the retail rights for quick cash. That is the talk of a man who is drowning. I leaned back in my chair, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. So that is the plan. You want to gut the soul of my company to turn it into a generic hotel chain just so you can get your hands on fast cash. Tell me, Kyle, is the crypto market treating you that badly? Or is it something else? Kyle's face went from red to white in a split second. He slammed his hand on the desk again, harder this time. Do not play smart with me, Simone. You are the one being committed, remember? You are the unstable one. I am doing you a favor. I am trying to salvage what I can before you burn it all down with your mood swings. Now, where is the access key to the corporate accounts? I want to get a head start on the audit before the gala. He reached for the laptop on my desk, his fingers grasping for the machine that held the codes to $600 million. That was the moment the line was crossed. I pressed the silent alarm button mounted underneath my desk. Do not touch my computer, Kyle. I said, my voice low and dangerous. He laughed, a cruel sound. Or what? You are going to throw a stapler at me. Face it, Simone. You are done. The doors to my office burst open again, but this time it was not a frantic receptionist. It was David and Jerome, my head of security. Both men were 6 feet 4 inches of muscle and stone-faced professionalism. They had been with me since I opened the first hotel. They knew my family history. They knew exactly who Kyle was, and they had been waiting for this day. Remove him, I said simply. Kyle spun around, his eyes bulging. You cannot touch me. I am a future board member. I am family. Jerome stepped forward, his movement fluid and efficient. He did not speak. He simply grabbed Kyle by the upper arm with a grip that looked painful. Kyle yelped, twisting his body to break free, but David stepped in, grabbing the other arm. They lifted him off the ground slightly, his expensive loafers skidding uselessly on the marble floor. Unband me, Kyle screamed, his voice cracking. This is assault. I will sue you. I will ruin you, Simone. They dragged him backward out of the office and into the open-plan workspace, where 50 of my employees were now standing and watching. The silence of the office was shattered by Kyle's undignified shouting. He was kicking and thrashing like a toddler in a supermarket tantrum. You are crazy, he yelled, pointing a shaking finger back at me as they hauled him toward the elevators. You are a lunatic, just like your aunt. Wait until Saturday. You will be in a straitjacket. I walked to the door of my office, leaning against the frame with my arms crossed. I watched as my staff watched him. There was no pity in their eyes, only shock, and a growing realization of what I had been dealing with. Kyle was not projecting power. He was projecting chaos. As David pressed the call button for the elevator, Kyle stopped struggling for a brief second. He looked back at me through the glass walls of the conference room. For a moment, the anger vanished from his face, and I saw what was truly underneath. It was terror, pure, unadulterated panic. His eyes were wide and wet. He was sweating profusely. He mouthed something that looked like please, but the elevator doors dinged open. Jerome and David shoved him inside. The last thing I saw before the metal doors slid shut was Kyle's face crumpling into despair. He slumped against the elevator wall, defeated. I turned back to my silent staff. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for an explanation, waiting to see if the rumors about my mental state were true. I straightened my blazer. I apologize for the disturbance, everyone. That was a former consultant who was terminated for gross misconduct. Please get back to work. We have a company to run. As the hum of the office slowly returned to normal, I walked back to my desk and sat down. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. Kyle was not just greedy, he was terrified. A man does not humiliate himself like that unless the alternative is something much worse. He needed that $10 million immediately. My phone rang. It was Marcus. I picked it up. Tell me you found something good, I said. Simone. Marcus said, his voice grim. You were right. It is not just bad, it is catastrophic. I am sending you the file now. But you better sit down. Your father and Kyle have gotten themselves involved with Viper Capital. I looked at the dent in the wall where Kyle had slammed the door. Viper Capital, the loan sharks of the corporate world. I opened the file Marcus sent. The numbers on the screen confirmed everything. The fear in Kyle's eyes made perfect sense now. He was not afraid of me. He was afraid of what would happen to him when the clock ran out. I smiled. Perfect, I whispered. I drove my car toward the outskirts of the city where the skyline faded into the shadows of old industrial buildings that had been repurposed into exclusive speakeasies. Marcus had chosen a place called The Vault. It was underground, dimly lit, and quiet enough to hear a pin drop, which was exactly what I needed. My head was still throbbing from the confrontation with Kyle, but the adrenaline had sharpened my senses to a razor edge. I parked in the back alley and walked down the steel steps, the humid Georgia air clinging to my skin. Marcus was already there, sitting in a high-backed leather booth in the far corner. He was a man of few words, a former forensic accountant turned private investigator who could find a single missing dime in a billion-dollar budget. He did not smile when he saw me. He did not offer a drink. He simply tapped his finger on a thick leather-bound dossier resting on the table between us. The look in his eyes was not one of pity, but of grave concern. I sat down opposite him, and the leather seat creaked in the silence. Marcus pushed the dossier toward me. It was heavy, heavier than a stack of papers should be. It felt like I was holding the weight of a tombstone. "You are not going to like this," Simone Marcus said, his voice low and gravelly. "In fact, you are going to wish you had stayed home tonight." I looked at the folder. I had expected bad investments. I had expected maybe some gambling debts, or a hidden mistress. I was prepared for moral failure. I was not prepared for the catastrophe that lay inside. "Tell me," I said, placing my hand on the cover. "Just give me the headlines before I look at the wreckage." Marcus took a sip of his bourbon. "Your father is not just broke, Simone. He is underwater. Deep underwater. And he has dragged everyone down with him. The lifestyle, the cars, the vacations, the charity galas. It is all smoke and mirrors. He has been funding it with loans to pay off other loans for 5 years. It is a Ponzi scheme where the only victim is his own family legacy." I opened the folder. The first page was a summary of assets and liabilities. My eyes scanned the columns and my stomach dropped. The numbers were in the red, deep blood red. "This cannot be right," I whispered, tracing the line for the Buckhead estate. "It is right," Marcus replied. "He took out a third mortgage on the house 6 months ago. A third mortgage, Simone. Who even underwrites that high-risk lenders? The interest rate is predatory. He is bleeding $20,000 a month just in interest payments on the house alone. If he misses one more payment, the bank initiates foreclosure proceedings." I turned the page. It got worse. The retirement accounts, the ones he had bragged about for years, the ones he said were the bedrock of the bank's family wealth. Balance zero. "He liquidated the pension fund," Marcus explained, pointing to a series of wire transfers. "Last year, he pulled out everything, penalties and all. And look where it went." I followed the money trail. It did not go into investments. It went to American Express, Visa Black Card, Cartier, Four Seasons Resorts. He had drained his future to pay for the illusion of his present. He had burned through his life savings just to keep up appearances for people who did not even like him. I felt a wave of nausea. My mother, she had no idea. She was sitting in that house surrounded by flowers and servants, thinking she was secure, thinking she was the matriarch of a dynasty. In reality, she was living in a house of cards that was already on fire. "And Kyle?" I asked, flipping to the section on my brother-in-law. Marcus let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Kyle is the accelerant. Your father was bad with money, but Kyle is a catastrophic gambler who thinks he is a genius. Look at the crypto wallet transactions." I looked. It was a sea of losses. Hundreds of thousands of dollars poured into coins with ridiculous names, all of which had crashed to zero. And the capital for these investments, it came from my father. Reginald had given Kyle access to his lines of credit. He had trusted the one person in the family who was more incompetent than he was. They are broke, Simone. Completely destitute. They have been living on credit fumes for months. That is why they need Onyx. They do not want to run your company. They want to strip it. They need your liquid cash to stop the bleeding before the creditors come knocking. I closed my eyes for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of the betrayal. The conservatorship, the doctors, the accusations of insanity. It was all a desperate, violent claw for survival. They were willing to lock me away in a mental institution just so they could raid my corporate accounts to pay for their mistakes. It was not personal. It was purely, sickeningly financial. But there is something else, isn't there? I said, opening my eyes. I can see it in your face, Marcus. Being broke explains the desperation, but it does not explain the fear. I saw Kyle's face today. He was terrified. That wasn't just fear of bankruptcy. That was fear of something else. Marcus nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was different from the others. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a promissory note. It looked official, but the logo at the top sent a chill down my spine. Viper Capital. I knew that name. Everyone in the business world knew that name, whispered in hushed tones at cocktail parties. They weren't a bank. They were a private equity firm in name only. In reality, they were sophisticated loan sharks who lent money to desperate executives when traditional banks said no. Their collection methods were notorious. They didn't just ruin your credit score. They ruined your life. Reginald and Kyle borrowed $15 million from Viper Capital 3 months ago. Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper. It was a short-term bridge loan, high interest, collateralized by everything they had left. The house, the cars, their personal reputations. 15 million. I repeated the number, staggering me. What did they do with it? They tried to double down. Kyle convinced your father that he had an insider tip on a tech merger. They put the entire loan into it. The merger never happened. The money is gone, vanished into the ether of bad speculation. And the repayment terms, I asked, dreading the answer. Balloon payment, full principal plus 20% interest, due in full on Monday. I looked at the calendar on my phone. The gala was Saturday. Monday was 3 days away. Monday, I whispered. If they do not pay by Monday close of business, Marcus continued. Viper Capital doesn't just sue. They have a clause in the contract, a confession of judgment. It means they can seize assets immediately without a trial. But Viper usually doesn't wait for the sheriff. They send their own people to secure the assets, and they are not polite. The pieces of the puzzle slam together. The rush, the panic, the sudden need for control of Onyx. They needed my company's cash reserves to pay back Viper Capital on Monday morning. If they didn't, they weren't just going to lose the house. They were going to face the wrath of a criminal syndicate that broke legs as easily as they broke contracts. My father and Kyle were walking dead men. I sat back in the leather booth, the hum of the air conditioner, the only sound in the room. I looked at the promissory note again. $15 million. It was a fortune to them. A fortune, too. It was the price of their lives. But to me, to the Onyx collection, it was a tax write-off. A cold, dangerous idea began to form in the back of my mind. It started as a spark and quickly roared into a flame. I looked at the name on the bottom of the Viper Capital contract, the signature of the managing partner. Elias Thorne. Do you know Elias Thorne? I asked Marcus. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I know of him. Why? Because I said, reaching for my purse and pulling out my checkbook. My father owes Viper Capital $15 million. Viper Capital wants their money. They don't care who it comes from, do they? No, Marcus said slowly, realizing where I was going. They just want the cash. They want to close the books. Good, I said. I stood up, taking the Viper Capital document with me. "Where are you going?" Simone Marcus asked. "I am going to make a deal with the devil." I said, my voice steady and devoid of fear. "My father wants to steal my company to pay his debt. I am going to save him the trouble. I am not going to pay his debt for him. I am going to buy it." I walked toward the stairs, leaving the darkness of the vault behind me. The plan was crazy. It was risky. But it was the only way to end this. By Monday morning, I wouldn't be the daughter they were trying to commit. I would be the one person they couldn't run from. I would be their creditor. And unlike Viper Capital, I wasn't interested in their money. I was interested in justice. Marcus leaned forward in the dim light of the speakeasy and slid a smaller, thinner file across the table. It contained a series of screenshots from my encrypted messaging app and a transaction log from a digital wallet. I picked it up and squinted at the complex strings of code and timestamps. To the untrained eye, it looked like gibberish, but Marcus began to translate the data into a narrative of greed that made my stomach turn. This was not just a bad investment, Simone. This was a setup. The crypto exchange your father poured that $15 million into was called Apex Nova. It was unregulated, based in the Cayman Islands, and promised returns that were mathematically impossible. But here is the kicker. Apex Nova had a referral program, a very aggressive one. I looked closer at the documents. There was a user handle listed as King Kyle 88. My jaw tightened. Kyle was an affiliate, Marcus said, his voice dripping with disgust. He did not just advise your father to invest, he recruited him. For every dollar Reginald Banks put into the platform, Kyle received a 5% commission immediately paid out in Ethereum. Your brother-in-law convinced your father to leverage the family estate and take out a loan from violent sharks so that he could pocket a quick $750,000 in referral fees. I felt the blood drain from my face. Kyle had treated his own father-in-law like a mark. He had hustled him. And the platform, I asked, knowing the answer. It was a rug pull, Marcus confirmed. Apex Nova froze withdrawals 2 weeks after your father's deposit cleared. The founders vanished. The $15 million is gone. Vaporized. But Kyle? He cashed out his referral bonus the day before the crash. He made $750,000 while your father lost everything. So Kyle has money, I said, my voice rising. He has almost $1 million. Why are they broke? Marcus shook his head slowly. Because Kyle is an idiot. He took that stolen commission and betted on sports futures and high-risk options, hoping to turn it into $10 million to pay back the loan before your father found out. He lost it all, every cent, in less than a month. So now you have a situation where the son-in-law scammed the father is in debt to the mafia, and the money that started it all does not exist anymore. I sat back against the leather booth, feeling a mix of horror and vindication. I had always known Kyle was a leech, but I never realized he was a parasite willing to kill the host. He had orchestrated the destruction of my family finances for a commission check that he blew on gambling. And now, with the walls closing in, he was pointing the finger at me, claiming I was the unstable one. It was a level of gaslighting that was almost impressive in its audacity. But this brings us to the most twisted part of the story, Marcus said, tapping the table. Reginald knows. I froze. What do you mean he knows? I mean, your father found out about the referral fee last week. I found emails between them. Reginald knows Kyle scammed him. He knows Kyle is the reason the money is gone. Then why, I whispered, why is he working with him? Why is he trying to steal my company to save the man who ruined him? If I were Reginald, I would have turned Kyle over to the police. I would have let Viper Capital break his legs. Marcus sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of all the sins he had uncovered in his career. Because of his pride, Simone. You know your father better than I do. Reginald Banks is a man who would rather die than admit he was made a fool. If he exposes Kyle, he has to admit to his friends at the country club, to the church deacons, to the business community, that he was outsmarted by his unemployed white son-in-law. He has to admit that he gambled the family legacy and lost. His ego cannot survive that. I stared at the flickering candle on the table. It made sick sense. My father was a narcissist of the highest order. To him, being a victim was worse than being a villain. If he turned on Kyle, the world would know Reginald was stupid. But if he turned on me, if he painted me as the crazy daughter who needed to be removed for the good of the company, then he gets to play the martyr, the strong patriarch making a hard decision. He is protecting the man who robbed him, I said, realizing the full scope of their toxicity. Because exposing the robbery would damage his reputation, so they formed an alliance, a pact of mutually assured destruction. Kyle keeps his mouth shut about the bad loans, and Reginald keeps his mouth shut about the scam. And together, they target the only person in the family who actually has liquidity. Me. They are cannibalizing you to cover their tracks, Marcus said. It is cowardly. It is the most pathetic display of masculinity I have ever seen. They would rather destroy a successful black woman their own blood than admit they failed. They are bonded by their shame, Simone. And that makes them dangerous. They have justified this in their heads. They think they are entitled to your money because in their twisted worldview, you only have it because Reginald allowed you to exist. They do not see Onyx as your creation. They see it as their spare tire. I closed the file. The anger I felt was different now. It was not the hot explosive rage of before. It was cold. It was solid. It felt like steel hardening in a forge. For years I had tried to earn my father's respect. I had built hotels. I had made millions. I had married a good man. I had done everything right, hoping that one day he would look at me with the same adoration he gave to Chantel and Kyle. Now I knew that day would never come. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because my competence was a mirror that showed him his own failure. He hated me because I was the man he pretended to be. I looked at Marcus. How do we buy the debt? I asked. Marcus blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in my tone. Simone, you do not have to do this. We can take this evidence to the police. We can get a restraining order. You can walk away and let Viper Capital do whatever they do. You do not owe them $15 million. I know I do not owe them, I said, reaching for my purse. But if I go to the police, it takes months. There will be investigations. The press will find out. The Onyx stock will plummet because of the scandal. And in the end, my father might still find a way to weasel out or blame me. No, I need this to end on Monday. I need it to end on my terms. I pulled out my checkbook. My hand was steady. Viper Capital is a business, Marcus. A dirty one, but a business. They have $15 million in bad debt that is about to default. Collecting on that is a hassle. They have to hire thugs, they have to seize assets, they have to auction off a house that is already leveraged. It takes time and money. If I walk in there with a certified check for $12 million today, immediate payment, no questions asked, will they sell me the note? Marcus looked at me, assessing my resolve. For $12 million cash, Elias Thorne would sell his own mother. He gets most of his principal back without lifting a finger. He will take that deal in a heartbeat. But Simone, listen to me. Once you buy that debt, you become the creditor. You step into the shoes of the shark. Exactly, I said, standing up. I do not want to save them, Marcus. I want to own them. I walked toward the exit, the plan forming perfectly in my mind. I was going to buy the debt through a shell company. I would let them walk into that gala on Saturday night thinking they had won. I would let them stand on that stage and bask in the applause. And then I would pull the rug out from under them so hard they would feel the impact for the rest of their miserable lives. Reginald Banks wanted a transaction. He wanted to trade my freedom for his survival. Well, I was about to give him the transaction of a lifetime. I was going to buy his sins, and I was going to make him pay for them with the only thing he had left: his dignity. Let us go see Mr. Thorne, I said, opening the heavy steel door. I have some shopping to do. The elevator ride to the 45th floor of the Sovereign Tower was silent and smooth, the kind of silence that costs money. Viper Capital did not advertise on billboards or run commercials during football games. They occupied the top 3 floors of one of the most expensive buildings in Atlanta, hiding in plain sight behind frosted glass and nondescript heavy oak doors. I checked my reflection in the polished steel of the elevator doors. The woman staring back at me was not the terrified daughter who had fled her parents' house the night before. She was Simone Banks, CEO of a $600 million empire, and she was about to swim with sharks. When the doors opened, I was greeted not by a receptionist, but by 2 armed guards standing on either side of a reception desk made of a single slab of black granite. They did not ask for my ID. They already knew who I was. "Mr. Thorne is expecting you," the receptionist said without looking up from her screen. Her voice was cool and detached, matching the temperature of the room. I walked past her, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. The office was a fortress of glass and chrome designed to intimidate. It smelled of expensive leather and fear. I was led down a long corridor lined with modern art that looked like violence captured on canvas. At the end of the hall, double doors opened to reveal Elias Thorne. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the city he slowly bled dry. He turned as I entered. He was a handsome man in his 50s, wearing a suit that cost more than most people earned in a year. His smile was practiced charming and utterly devoid of warmth. "Ms. Banks," he said, walking over to offer a hand that I knew better than to shake. "I must admit I was surprised when my secretary told me you were in the lobby. Your father usually sends his lawyer to make excuses. I assume you are here to plead for an extension on his behalf. It is a noble gesture, but I am afraid Viper Capital does not operate on sentiment." I did not take the seat he offered. I stood in the center of the room holding my Hermes Birkin bag like a shield. "I am not here to beg Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice steady. "And I am certainly not here to ask for mercy for Reginald Banks. I am here to discuss a business transaction." Thorne raised an eyebrow, amused. "A transaction? You mean payment? Did he send you with a check? I know Reginald is having liquidity issues." "He did not send me," I corrected him. "He does not even know I am here." I walked over to the conference table and placed my bag on it. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. Thorne watched me with curiosity. He was used to desperate people crying in his office. He was not used to business peers analyzing his portfolio. "I know about the $15 million loan," I said. "I know about the balloon payment due on Monday. And I know about the collateral, the Buckhead estate, the cars, the personal guarantee." Thorne shrugged. "Then you know that on Monday afternoon my team will be seizing your childhood home. It is standard procedure." "It is a bad investment, Elias," I said, using his first name to shift the power dynamic. I ran the numbers. My father has a third mortgage on that house. If you foreclose, the bank gets paid first. After the primary and secondary lien holders take their share, and after you pay the legal fees and the auction costs, you will be lucky to recoup $3 million. Thorne stopped smiling. His eyes narrowed. "And Kyle?" I continued pressing my advantage. "You are counting on his personal guarantee. Kyle is insolvent. He has 0 assets. You are chasing ghosts, Elias. You have $15 million of bad debt on your books, and come Monday, you are going to realize you have been holding an empty bag." The room went silent. Thorne looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. He realized I had done my due diligence. He realized I knew he had made a mistake lending to them. So he said, his voice losing its charm, "What do you want, Simone?" "I want to clean up your balance sheet," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out a cashier's check. I placed it on the table face down. "I am offering you an exit strategy." Thorne walked over to the table. He looked at the check, but he did not pick it up yet. He looked at me, waiting for the number. $12 million, I said. "Cash, certified funds, payable immediately." Thorne laughed. "You want me to take a $3 million haircut?" On a $15 million note, I looked him dead in the eye. "It is $12 million today, guaranteed. Or it is $0 million on Monday, and years of litigation to fight the banks for a house that is already underwater." You are a smart man, Elias. You know the time value of money. You know that carrying bad debt hurts your leverage ratio. You can clear this off your books before the quarter ends. You can tell your partners you recovered 80% of a toxic asset. That is a win. Thorne looked at the check again. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was a predator, but he was also a mathematician. He knew I was right. Chasing Reginald and Kyle would yield nothing but satisfaction. Taking my money yielded capital he could deploy elsewhere immediately. Why, he asked, looking up at me. Why would you pay $12 million for a debt that is not yours? You hate them, or you love them. I smiled, a cold, sharp smile that matched the room. That is irrelevant to the transaction, I said. Do we have a deal? Thorne hesitated for only a second longer. Then he reached out and picked up the check. He examined the watermark, the signature, the bank certification. It was real. It was freedom from a headache he didn't want. He walked over to his intercom. Send in the legal team, he said. And bring the bank's file, the original. 10 minutes later, the conference table was covered in paperwork. Thorne's lawyers were efficient. They drafted a transfer of lien and an assignment of debt agreement. They did not ask questions. They just wanted to know the name of the entity purchasing the debt. I do not want this in my personal name, I said, taking the pen. I want it held by a limited liability company. And what is the name of the company, Ms. Banks? The lawyer asked, typing into his laptop. I paused. I thought about the years of neglect. I thought about the text message on my wedding day. I thought about the conservatorship papers waiting on my father's dining table. I thought about the goddess of divine retribution, the one who punishes arrogance before the fall. Nemesis, I said. Nemesis. Holdings, LLC. The lawyer typed it in. I signed my name on the bottom line. With each stroke of the pen, the weight of the last 35 years seemed to shift. I was no longer the child waiting for approval. I was the entity holding the leash. Thorne slid the original promissory note across the table to me. It was the document my father had signed with a shaking hand 3 months ago. It was the document that bound him to Viper Capital. Now it bound him to me. Pleasure doing business with you, Simone, Thorne said, pocketing the $12 million check. You are tougher than your father. That is a low bar, I replied, standing up. I picked up the file. It felt heavy, but it was a good weight. Inside were the mortgage deeds, the car titles, and the personal guarantees of Reginald Banks and Kyle Jensen. I owned their home. I owned their vehicles. I owned their financial futures. One more thing, Thorne said as I turned to leave. The default clause. It triggers on Monday at 5 p.m. Until then, you cannot touch them. I know, I said, walking toward the door. I am counting the minutes. I took the elevator down to the lobby, clutching the file to my chest. The world outside looked different now. The sun was brighter. The air was cleaner. I walked to my car, my mind racing with the logistics of what had to happen next. I had the weapon. Now I needed to set the stage. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. Simone, please come to dinner tonight. Your father is very upset. He just wants what is best for you. We can work this out. I looked at the message and felt a pang of pity quickly replaced by resolve. They thought they were negotiating with a scared daughter. They didn't know they were texting the CEO of Nemesis Holdings. I typed a reply. I need time to think, Mom. I will see you at the gala on Saturday. I will have an answer for Dad then. It wasn't a lie. I would have an answer. It just wasn't the answer they were expecting. I started the car and drove toward the one place where I could hide the evidence until Saturday. My husband David's office. He was an architect, and he had a safe in his studio that only he and I knew the combination to. As I drove, I allowed myself to imagine the look on Kyle's face when the truth came out. He thought he was playing 4D chess, scamming his father-in-law and gaslighting his sister-in-law. He thought he was untouchable because he was a white man in a world that often gave him the benefit of the doubt. But debt is colorblind, and foreclosure does not care about your privilege. I pulled into David's parking lot. I needed to tell him. I needed him to know that I had just spent $12 million of our liquid savings. It was a gamble. If I couldn't recover the assets, if the house didn't sell for enough, if I couldn't garnish Kyle's future wages, we would take a hit. But David had told me the night before, when I cried in his arms, that he would burn the world down for me. I walked into his studio. He looked up from his drafting table, his eyes full of worry. "Simone, what happened? Where have you been?" I walked over to him and placed the Viper Capital file on his desk. "I bought it, David," I said, my voice trembling slightly, now that the adrenaline was fading. "I bought the debt. I own them." David opened the file. He saw the name, Nemesis Holdings. He saw the amount. He looked up at me and a slow smile spread across his face. "Nemesis," he said softly. "That is perfect. It starts on Saturday," I said. "They want a show at the gala. They want a public transfer of power." David stood up and kissed my forehead. "Then let us give them a show," he said. I looked at the file one last time before he locked it in the safe. The clock was ticking. 48 hours until the gala. 48 hours to play the part of the broken, compliant daughter one last time. I had to be convincing. I had to make them believe they had won. Because the higher they climbed on their pedestal of arrogance, the harder they would fall when I pulled the rug out. And I wasn't just going to pull it, I was going to set it on fire. The game was set, the players were in position, and for the first time in my life, I was the one making the rules. 48 hours. That was the timeline I had given myself to dismantle a lifetime of dysfunction. After leaving David's office with the knowledge that I now owned the debt that was strangling my father, I drove back to my own apartment, not to sleep, but to prepare for the performance of a lifetime. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, the same place where I usually applied my war paint for board meetings. Normally, I would apply bold red lipstick and sharp-winged eyeliner to project strength and competence. Today, I needed to project the opposite. I took a washcloth and scrubbed my face until it was raw, removing every trace of the confident CEO. I reached into the back of my vanity drawer and found a foundation stick I had bought by mistake 2 years ago. It was 3 shades too light for my skin tone. I applied it sparingly, just enough to give my complexion a sickly, ashen cast. I skipped the blush. I skipped the mascara. I wanted to look hollow. I wanted to look like a woman whose spirit had finally been broken by the weight of her own instability. I changed out of my tailored power suit and into a loose, oversized cardigan and a pair of simple slacks that hung off my frame. It was the kind of outfit one wore when they had given up. I practiced my walk in the hallway. I slowed my pace. I let my shoulders slump forward. I added a slight tremor to my hands, the kind that suggests a nervous system fried by stress and heavy sedatives. It was terrifying how easy it was to slip into the role of the victim. It made me realize how much energy I spent every single day holding myself up just to prove I was not broken. Now I was going to give them exactly what they wanted to see. I was going to be the fragile little girl who needed her daddy to save her. I drove back to the Buckhead estate as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the manicured lawns that my father prized more than his children. The gate opened automatically. They were expecting me. My heart was pounding not from fear this time, but from a cold, calculated anticipation. I was a Trojan horse entering the city walls, and inside my mind I carried the soldiers that would burn this place to the ground. I parked the car and took a deep breath. I visualized the check I had given Elias Thorne. I visualized the lien documents locked in David's safe. I let those images anchor me. Then I opened the car door and let the mask slip into place. I shuffled up the front steps, my movements heavy and uncoordinated. When the butler opened the door, I did not make eye contact. I stared at the floor. The family was gathered in the living room, the same room where they had threatened me just the night before. But the atmosphere had shifted. The tension was replaced by a smug, victorious air. Reginald sat in his favorite wingback chair, a glass of scotch in his hand. Kyle was leaning against the fireplace, swirling his own drink, looking like the lord of the manor. Chantal was flipping through a magazine on the sofa. When I entered the room, conversation stopped. They looked at me, and for a second I saw a flicker of doubt in Reginald's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by satisfaction. My disguise had worked. I looked defeated. My mother was the first to move. She stood up and hurried over to me, her face twisted into a mask of exaggerated concern. "Oh, Simone," she cooed, reaching out to touch my arm. "You look dreadful, darling. Have you slept at all?" Her touch felt cold. It was the touch of a woman who was relieved she did not have to fight anymore. I flinched slightly, pulling away just enough to sell the idea that I was fragile. "I am tired, Mom," I whispered, my voice raspy. "I just want this to be over." Kyle chuckled from across the room. He took a sip of his scotch and walked toward me, his gait loose and arrogant. He thought he had won. He thought the $15 million problem was about to be solved by my surrender. "We all want this to be over, Simone," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We told you that you were not built for the pressure. Running a company like Onyx takes a certain kind of stamina. It is good that you finally realized you need help. There is no shame in admitting you are out of your depth." I looked at him. I forced my eyes to fill with tears. I bit my lip to stop it from trembling, or maybe to stop myself from laughing in his face. "You are right, Kyle," I said softly. "I cannot do it anymore. The voices, the stress, it is too much." Reginald stood up. He walked over to the coffee table where a fresh set of legal documents lay waiting. He did not offer me a drink. He did not offer me a seat. He just pointed to the papers. "Let us not drag this out, Simone," he said, his tone businesslike. "We have the revised transfer agreement here. It grants full power of attorney to me and appoints Kyle as the interim chief operating officer. Once you sign this, we can call Dr. Arrington and cancel the commitment order. You can go to the spa in Sedona. We have already booked your flight for Sunday morning." Sunday morning. They wanted me out of the state immediately after the gala. They wanted me gone so they could liquidate the assets without interference. I walked toward the table, my legs feeling heavy. I sat down on the edge of the sofa. The pen looked like a weapon. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and expensive. My father's favorite brand. I reached for it and let my hand shake violently. I hovered the pen over the signature line. The room was silent. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I could feel their eyes on me, greedy and impatient. They were mentally spending my money. They were imagining the relief of paying off Viper Capital. I lowered the pen to the paper. I wrote the first letter of my name, S. Then I let out a sob and dropped the pen. It clattered onto the mahogany table, rolling away from the document. "I cannot," I cried, burying my face in my hands. "I cannot do it. My hands, they will not stop shaking." Kyle let out an exasperated sigh. "Oh, for God's sake, just hold the pen and sign the damn paper, Simone. Do not be dramatic." Reginald stepped closer, his patience wearing thin. "Simone, pick up the pen. You promised. Do not make me call the orderlies. They are on speed dial." I looked up at him, my face wet with tears. It was the performance of my life. "I am trying, Dad," I sobbed. "But I feel sick. The medication Dr. Arrington gave me. It makes me dizzy. Look at this signature. It is a mess. The bank will not accept it. You know how strict the compliance department is. If the signature does not match the file, they will flag the transfer as fraud, especially with the stock dropping. They will freeze the accounts for investigation." The word fraud made Kyle stiffen. He knew all about fraud. He knew that a frozen account meant he died on Monday. "She has a point," Reginald, Kyle said quickly, his voice tight. "If the bank freezes the assets for verification, we are screwed. We need the liquidity by Monday. By next week. We cannot afford a compliance hold." Reginald glared at the messy scrawl on the paper. He knew I was right about the bank protocols. He had set them up himself decades ago. "So what do you suggest, Simone?" he snapped. "You want to wait until you feel better. We do not have time for you to recover." "No," I said, wiping my eyes with my sleeve. I do not want to wait. But I want to do it right. I want to leave with dignity, Dad. I do not want the last memory of my career to be me signing away my legacy in a dark living room while crying. I took a deep, shuddering breath and looked him in the eye, appealing to the one thing that mattered to him more than money: his ego. The gala, I said, the 40th anniversary gala on Saturday night. Everyone will be there. The mayor, the investors, the press. What about it? Reginald asked, suspicious. Let me sign it there, I proposed. On stage, in front of everyone. We can frame it as a passing of the torch. You can give a speech about family legacy. You can tell everyone that I am stepping down to focus on my health, and that I have chosen you and Kyle to carry the vision forward. I saw the spark in Reginald's eyes. He was visualizing it. The applause, the spotlight, the adoration of his peers as he reclaimed his throne. He did not just want the company. He wanted the glory. He wanted the world to see him as the benevolent patriarch saving the empire, not the desperate debtor stealing it. If I sign it on stage, I continued, my voice gaining a little strength, it validates the transfer instantly. The witnesses will be the most powerful people in Atlanta. The bank cannot question a signature made in front of 500 people. It secures the stock price. It makes you look like a hero, Dad. And it lets me say goodbye with my head held high. I watched the gears turn in his head. He looked at Kyle. Kyle looked nervous. I do not know, Reginald. Kyle muttered. It is risky. What if she changes her mind? I turned to Kyle. I have nowhere to go, Kyle. You have the medical reports. You have the power. If I refuse to sign on Saturday, you can have the police drag me off the stage and commit me right there. It would be an even bigger spectacle. I am not stupid. I know I am beaten. I just want to surrender with some class. Reginald smoothed his tie. The idea of being the hero was too tempting to resist. He imagined the headlines. Bank's family legacy secured. He imagined the toasts. Fine, he said. Saturday night. Really? Dad? I asked, feigning relief. Yes, Reginald said, puffing out his chest. It is a better narrative. We will have the lawyers draft a ceremonial document for the stage and the official binding ones for the backstage signing. You will give a short speech. You will thank us for stepping in, and then you will sign. I nodded quickly. Thank you, Dad. Thank you for letting me do this my way. Just remember, Simone, Kyle warned, pointing a finger at me. One false move, one word off script, and Dr. Arrington will be in the front row with a syringe. Do not test us. I won't, I whispered, standing up slowly. I just want to go home and rest now. I will see you at the dinner table. Can I stay for dinner? I do not want to be alone tonight. Reginald waved his hand dismissively. Fine, wash your face. You look like a corpse. We are eating in 10 minutes. I turned and walked toward the powder room. My legs were still trembling, but inside my heart was steady as a rock. They had taken the bait. They were so blinded by their need for public validation that they had invited their executioner to the main stage. They thought the gala was going to be their coronation. They had no idea it was going to be their funeral. I walked into the small bathroom off the hallway and locked the door. I leaned against the sink and stared at my pale reflection. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. You want a show, Dad? I whispered to the empty room. You want a speech. You want the whole world to watch the bank's family business. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I checked the battery. It was full. I checked the recording app. It was ready. I am going to give you a show you will never forget. I unlocked the door and headed back to the dining room. The trap was set. Now all I needed was the evidence. I needed them to admit their plan in their own words. And I knew exactly how to get it. Dinner was served, and I was starving. Not for food, but for the truth. Dinner was a stifling affair, served on fine china that felt more like the cold porcelain of a morgue slab than a family table. My mother had ordered the cook to prepare roast duck with a cherry reduction, a dish she knew was my father's favorite, likely in a desperate attempt to keep his mood elevated. We ate in a silence that was only broken by the scrape of silver against the plate and the heavy breathing of my father, who ate with the gusto of a man who believed he had just conquered a kingdom. I picked at my food, pushing the meat around to make it look like I had an appetite, but my stomach was a knot of tension. Every time I looked up, I caught Kyle watching me with a smug, satisfied grin that made my skin crawl. He was drinking heavily again, pouring himself generous glasses of the vintage red wine that my father had been saving for a special occasion. Tonight apparently qualified as special because they believed they had finally broken me. I knew I needed to make my move before the dessert course. The conversation was drifting toward the logistics of Saturday, with Reginald pontificating about the guest list and how he would frame my resignation speech. I needed them alone. I needed the wolves to think the shepherd was gone so they would reveal their true nature. I waited until my father paused to take a drink of water, and then I let my hand tremble violently against the table, causing my fork to clatter loudly against the china. Everyone jumped. I brought my hand to my forehead, feigning a wave of dizziness that I had practiced in the mirror only hours before. "I am sorry," I whispered, my voice weak and breathless. "The medication. It makes me feel so nauseous when I eat. I think I need a moment." My mother looked concerned, but Kyle just rolled his eyes. "Go splash some water on your face, Simone," he said dismissively. "We have details to go over." I stood up slowly, leaning on the table for support. As I did, I clutched my clutch bag where my phone was already recording. The centerpiece of the table was an ostentatious arrangement of white hydrangeas and cascading ivy, dense enough to hide anything. In one fluid motion, masked by my stumble, I slid the sleek black phone out of my bag and tucked it deep beneath the foliage of the flowers. It was invisible from their angle, nestled in the shadows of the vase, its microphone perfectly positioned to catch every whisper at the table. "I will just be a minute," I said, grabbing my bag, which was now lighter, and walking toward the hallway. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from the fake illness, but from the thrill of the espionage. I walked into the powder room and locked the door. I turned on the tap, letting the water run to create a sound buffer in case anyone was listening. I stared at myself in the mirror, counting the seconds. I needed to give them enough time. I needed my father to leave the room. I knew his bladder was weak, and he often took calls in his study after the main course. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. I imagined the phone sitting there like a grenade with the pin pulled, waiting to capture the shrapnel of their betrayal. When I finally returned to the dining room, the atmosphere had shifted. The air felt charged with a different kind of energy, something conspiratorial and dark. My father was gone. My mother was clearing plates with a nervous energy. Kyle and Chantel were leaning in close, their heads together. As I walked in, they pulled apart quickly, but the smirk on Kyle's face was even wider than before. "Feeling better?" he asked, his voice dripping with false concern. "Much," I lied. I walked back to my seat. I reached for my water glass, and under the cover of the movement, I slid my hand under the flowers. My fingers brushed the cool metal of the phone. I palmed it and slipped it back into my bag in a single smooth motion. "Where is Dad?" I asked, looking around. "He took a call from the mayor," Chantel said, examining her manicure. "He is in the study." I nodded. "I think I should go. I need to rest before Saturday. Please tell him I said goodnight." I left the house quickly, not waiting for their permission. As I walked to my car, the night air felt crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the suffocating toxicity I had just left. I got into the driver's seat and locked the doors. My hands were shaking for real now. I connected the phone to the car's Bluetooth system. I drove down the block and pulled into a darkened cul-de-sac, ensuring I was far enough away that no one could see me. I pressed play. The audio filled the car, clear and sharp. I heard the sound of my own footsteps walking away, then the door clicking shut. There was a moment of silence, followed by the scraping of a chair. Finally, I heard Kyle's voice say, She is pathetic. Did you see her shaking? She is completely broken. Then my father's voice. She is weak. She always has been. She does not have the constitution for power. I heard the sound of a phone ringing. My father groaned. It is the mayor. I have to take this. Keep her entertained if she comes back. I heard his heavy footsteps leaving the room. The door to the study closed, and then the real dinner conversation began. He is such a pompous old fool, Kyle said, his voice changing instantly from deferential to hateful. I thought he would never leave. God, I hate listening to his stories. Chantel laughed, the sound tinkling like broken glass. Be nice, baby. He is handing us the keys to the kingdom on Saturday. Keys to the kingdom, Kyle scoffed. Keys to a sinking ship that we have to bail out. But once we get the liquidity from the accounts, we can stabilize the debt. And then we deal with him. Deal with him? Chantel asked, her voice sounding bored, as if they were discussing what to watch on television. We cannot have him hovering over our shoulders, Chantel, Kyle said, the sound of liquid being poured into a glass filling the speakers. He thinks he is going to run the company. He thinks he is the CEO. It is delusional. Once Simone signs those papers and the transfer is official, we hold the power of attorney. We control the trust. So what is the plan? Chantel asked. There is a facility in Macon, Kyle said. Shady Pines or something like that. It is state-funded. Cheap. We transfer him there. We tell people it is a specialized memory care unit for his stress. Macon, Chantel said. That is 3 hours away. People will talk. Let them talk, Kyle snapped. Who cares? We will be living in the penthouse. And speaking of which, we need to list this house immediately. The upkeep is draining us. We sell the estate, we dump the old man in Macon, and we split the proceeds from the house sale 50-50. Half for the debt, half for us. And Mom, Chantel asked. She goes wherever he goes, Kyle said ruthlessly. Or she can move into a condo. I do not care. As long as they are out of the way. There was a pause. I held my breath in the car, waiting for my sister to defend our parents. Waiting for her to say that this was too far. Just make sure I get the jewelry first, Chantel said. Mom has a diamond tennis bracelet I have been eyeing for years. If you send her to a home, the nurses will just steal it. I will get you the bracelet, baby, Kyle promised. We are going to have everything. We just have to get through Saturday. The old man thinks he is winning. He has no idea he is signing his own death warrant. The recording continued with the sound of them clinking glasses. To us, Kyle said. To the new royalty. I pressed pause. The silence in my car was deafening. I stared out at the dark street, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I had expected greed. I had expected them to talk about spending my money. But I had not expected this. They were not just planning to steal from me. They were planning to discard our parents like trash. My father was so desperate to save face, so desperate to maintain his alliance with the white son-in-law, he thought validated his status that he was blind to the knife poised at his back. I replayed the section where Kyle called my father a pompous old fool. I replayed the part where Chantel asked for the jewelry before sending our mother to a state facility. It was horrific. It was monstrous. And it was perfect. A slow smile spread across my face in the darkness. This was not just leverage. This was a nuclear bomb. My father was a man of pride. He could forgive bad investments. He could perhaps even forgive theft if it was framed correctly. But he would never forgive being laughed at. He would never forgive being called a fool by the man he had elevated above his own daughter. And he would certainly never forgive the golden child Chantel for agreeing to ship him off to a low-budget nursing home just so she could steal a bracelet. I looked at the phone in my hand. It was no longer just a recording device. It was the sword of justice. I had planned to ruin them financially. I had planned to take the house and the cars. But now I realized the punishment had to be more severe. I was going to let them destroy each other. I started the car and put it into gear. I drove home with a sense of calm purpose. The gala was in 36 hours. I had the debt, I had the lien, and now I had the voice of Judas on tape. My father wanted a memorable night. He wanted a spectacle. I was going to give him one. I was going to play this tape, not for the police, not for the judge, but for him. I was going to let him hear exactly how much his beloved family loved him. I pulled onto the highway, the city lights blurring past me. The game had changed. It was no longer just about business. It was about showing Reginald Banks the true face of the monsters he had created. And when the dust settled on Saturday night, I would be the only one left standing. The St. Regis Ballroom had been transformed into a golden cage for the 40th anniversary of my parents' marriage. It was a spectacle of excess that bordered on obscene, especially considering the financial rot that lay beneath the foundation of the Banks family legacy. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars dripped from the ceiling, casting a warm, flattering light on the faces of Atlanta's elite. The tables were draped in silk imported from Italy, and the centerpieces were towering structures of white orchids and gold leaf that surely cost more than the college tuition of the waitstaff serving the champagne. A live jazz band played in the corner, the smooth notes of a saxophone floating over the din of polite conversation and the clinking of heavy silverware. It smelled of expensive perfume and roasted lamb, but to me it smelled like desperation. I stood at the top of the grand staircase hidden in the shadows of the mezzanine, watching the scene unfold below me. It was a masterclass in deception. Every person in that room believed they were celebrating a dynasty. They believed Reginald and Louise Banks were the pillars of the community, the standard bearers of Black excellence and generational wealth. They had no idea that the man of the hour was a fraud, who had mortgaged his home 3 times, and the woman by his side was about to be discarded into a state-run nursing home by her own children. The irony was suffocating. My father had spent the last of his credit to throw this party. He had burned the furniture to heat the house one last time, hoping that the warmth would convince the world he was still a king. I watched the servers move through the crowd with trays of caviar and vintage Dom Perignon, and I calculated the cost in my head. 50,000 for the venue, 20,000 for the flowers, 10,000 for the band. Every dollar spent was a dollar he owed to me. He was celebrating his anniversary with my money. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. The last time these people saw me, I was the subject of a pity campaign orchestrated by my own sister. Tonight was not about clearing my name. It was about rewriting the entire narrative. I touched the small clutch under my arm. Inside was the phone with the recording and the legal documents that would turn this gala into a courtroom. I was not just a guest tonight. I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Down on the floor, Reginald was in his element. He moved through the crowd like a politician, shaking hands and slapping backs, his laughter booming a little too loudly. He wore a tuxedo that I knew was bespoke, but I also knew he hadn't paid the tailor yet. He looked the part of the benevolent patriarch, stopping to kiss the cheeks of the mayor's wife and whispering knowing jokes to the city council members. Beside him, my mother smiled, her vacant practice smile, the dutiful wife oblivious to the fact that her husband had sold her out for a chance to keep up appearances. But it was Kyle who made my blood boil. He was strutting around the room as if he had already been crowned king. He had one hand in his pocket and a glass of scotch in the other, gesturing wildly as he spoke to Arthur, the lead investor from my board. I could see Arthur nodding, looking concerned, likely listening to Kyle spin lies about my mental health and how the new leadership would steer the ship to safer waters. Kyle looked arrogant and comfortable. He was playing the role of the capable successor, the man stepping up to save the family business from the hysterical daughter. I moved closer to the railing, straining to hear the whispers that floated up from the crowd. They were exactly what I expected. Such a tragedy about Simone, a woman in pearls, whispered to her neighbor. I heard she had a complete breakdown at the office, someone else murmured. Drugs, apparently. The pressure was too much for her. It is a blessing, Reginald is stepping back, and a man said, nodding solemnly. The girl was always a bit unstable. She never had her father's strength. The words stung, but they also fueled the fire in my chest. They were writing my obituary while I was still standing in the building. They looked at my father with admiration and at me with pity. They had no idea that the man they admired was a thief, and the woman they pitied was the only thing standing between him and prison. I watched Chantel hold court near the bar, showing off her diamond bracelet, the one she had practically stolen from our mother in her mind already. She was laughing, basking in the attention, enjoying her role as the sane, beautiful sister. They were all so sure of themselves. So sure that the script was written and the ending was decided. They thought I was backstage right now, likely trembling in a dressing room, waiting for my cue to come out and surrender. They thought I would walk onto that stage looking pale and defeated, read the speech they had written for me, and hand over the keys to the empire. I turned away from the railing and walked toward the dressing area. I shed the oversized cardigan and the drab slacks I had worn to the rehearsal. I wiped the pale makeup from my face, revealing my natural skin glowing and alive. I applied a coat of lipstick, the color of fresh blood, and then I stepped into the dress. It was not the modest beige suit my father had suggested. It was a structured architectural gown in blazing crimson silk. It hugged every curve of my body and featured a sharp, plunging neckline that screamed power, not penitence. It was a dress that commanded attention. A dress that said, "I am here and I am dangerous." I walked back to the top of the staircase. The band was taking a break and the room had quieted down slightly. I stepped into the light. A hush rippled through the room, starting near the stairs and spreading outward like a wave. Heads turned. Drinks were lowered. The whispers stopped dead. I descended the stairs slowly, my head held high, my eyes scanning the room with the intensity of a predator. I did not look like a woman on the verge of a breakdown. I looked like the CEO of a $600 million company. I saw Reginald's smile falter. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the image before him. This was not the broken daughter he had seen at dinner 2 nights ago. This was Simone Banks in her prime. Kyle froze mid-sentence, his glass halfway to his mouth. His eyes went wide with panic. He looked at Chantel, who was staring at me with open mouth, jealousy and confusion. I reached the bottom of the stairs and the crowd parted for me instinctively. I walked straight toward my family. I did not smile. I did not wave. I walked with the rhythmic click of my heels echoing on the marble, a metronome counting down the seconds to their destruction. Kyle recovered first. He handed his drink to a passing waiter and rushed to intercept me before I could reach the microphone on the stage. He grabbed my elbow, his grip hard and painful, masking the violence with a fake smile for the audience. "What the hell are you wearing, Simone?" he hissed through his teeth, his voice low and venomous. "You are supposed to look sick. You look like a runway model." This was not the plan. I pulled my arm from his grasp with a sharp jerk. "I felt better, Kyle," I said, my voice cool and loud enough for the people nearby to hear. The recovery was miraculous. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of scotch and fear. "Listen to me, you little witch. Do not think you can flip the script now. Dr. Arrington is standing right behind that curtain with 2 orderlies. You get up there and you read the speech we gave you. You tell them you are sick. You tell them you are stepping down. If you say one word that is not on that teleprompter, I will have them tackle you on stage and drag you out screaming. Do you understand me? We will lock you away tonight." I looked at him. I looked at the sweat beading on his forehead. I looked at the terror behind his eyes that he was trying so hard to hide with aggression. "I understand perfectly, Kyle," I said, smoothing the silk of my dress. I walked past him, leaving him standing there with his empty threats. I walked up the steps to the stage. My father was standing at the podium, clutching the wood like a lifeline. He looked at me with a mixture of anger and pleading. He needed me to save him. He needed me to play the part. I stepped up to the microphone. The spotlight hit my face, blindingly bright. I looked out at the sea of faces, the people who had whispered about me, the people who doubted me. I looked at Kyle standing at the foot of the stage, his hand signaling to someone behind the curtain. I looked at my mother, who was watching me with fearful eyes. I took a deep breath. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice booming through the speakers, steady and strong. My father exhaled, thinking I was about to begin the surrender. But I was not here to surrender. I was here to foreclose. Reginald Banks gripped the sides of the podium with hands that were manicured to perfection. He looked out at the sea of expectant faces, the creme de la creme of Atlanta society, and flashed the smile that had charmed investors and country club boards for decades. It was a smile of practiced benevolence, the kind that hid a multitude of sins behind gleaming white veneers. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system demanding complete silence. The jazz band faded out, and the room held its breath, waiting for the patriarch to speak. I stood a few feet away, just outside the circle of the spotlight, watching him like a hawk circling its prey. I could see the sweat glistening on his temples, a betraying sign of the immense pressure he was under. But to the audience, it likely just looked like the glow of excitement. My friend's family and distinguished guests. Reginald began, his voice rich and baritone, rolling over the crowd like warm honey. "Tonight is a celebration of love of 40 years with my beautiful wife Louise. But it is also a celebration of legacy. The bank's name has always stood for integrity, for strength, and for the future." He paused for effect, looking over at Kyle, who gave him a subtle thumbs up from the front row. Kyle looked smug, his arm draped over the back of Chantel's chair, secure in the belief that their plan had worked perfectly. But legacy requires sacrifice. Reginald continued, his tone shifting to one of solemn gravity. "It requires the wisdom to know when to lead and when to step back. My daughter Simone has been the face of the Onyx collection for the past 5 years. She has built incredible things, but the weight of such an empire is heavy, and sometimes that weight can be too much for one person to bear alone." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. He was doing it. He was publicly framing my ouster as a mercy killing. He was painting me as the fragile bird with a broken wing that needed to be put back in its cage. Simone has decided, with the full support of her loving family, to take a step back and focus on her health. Reginald lied, looking at me with eyes that were hard as flint. She has graciously agreed to pass the torch of leadership to a new team to ensure that the Onyx collection remains strong for generations to come. "Simone, darling, please join me." The applause was polite, tinged with that same pity I had heard in the whispers earlier. I stepped into the light. The heat of the spotlight hit me, but I did not shrink from it. I walked to the podium, my red dress blazing like a warning flare. Reginald stepped back, placing a hand on my shoulder. It was meant to look comforting, but I felt the warning squeeze of his fingers. He was reminding me of the threat. "Stick to the script, or the doctors come out." I looked at him one last time, memorizing the look of triumph on his face. It was the last time he would ever look at me that way. I stepped up to the microphone and adjusted the stand. I looked out at the crowd, at the hundreds of eyes watching me, waiting for the breakdown. "Thank you, Dad," I said, my voice steady and clear, echoing through the ballroom. "Thank you for those kind words. You talk so much about legacy, about truth, about the sacrifices we make for family. It is truly inspiring." I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make people uncomfortable. "You are right, Dad. Tonight is about the future, and it is about giving credit where credit is due. I have brought a gift for you, a special presentation to honor the reality of the bank's family legacy." Reginald looked confused. This was not in the script. He took a half step forward, perhaps to cut the mic, but I was faster. I pulled a small remote from my clutch and pressed the button. Behind me, the massive LED screen that had been cycling through photos of my parents' wedding suddenly went black. The music stopped abruptly. The room plunged into a confused silence. Then a single image appeared on the screen, magnified to 20 feet tall. It was not a photo. It was a document. The stark white background and the heavy black legal text were unmistakable, even from the back of the room. At the very top in bold letters were the words, "Notice of default and intent to foreclose." A gasp went through the room. I heard glass shatter as someone dropped a drink. Reginald turned around, squinting at the screen. I saw his knees buckle. He grabbed the podium for support, his face draining of all color until he looked like a wax figure melting under the lights. Kyle jumped up from his seat, knocking his chair over. "What is this?" Reginald whispered, his voice trembling so hard the microphone barely picked it up. "Simone, what have you done?" I turned back to the audience. My voice was no longer warm. It was ice. "For those of you in the back who cannot read the fine print, allow me to clarify," I said, my voice projecting with the authority of a gavel strike. "This is a legal notice regarding the property we are standing in right now. The bank's estate." I turned to look directly at my father. "You see, everyone here thinks this party is a celebration of wealth. But the truth is, this party is being held in a house that does not belong to you anymore, Dad." I pointed at the screen. 3 months ago, Reginald Banks and Kyle Jensen took out a high-interest loan for $15 million from a private equity firm called Viper Capital. They used the family estate, the cars, and their personal guarantees as collateral. They did this to cover up the fact that they lost the family fortune in a cryptocurrency scam. The crowd erupted. The polite murmurs turned into a roar of shock and gossip. I saw my mother put her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. She had not known. She had been living in a fool's paradise. Kyle was shouting now, trying to push his way toward the stage, but he was blocked by the sheer density of the stunned crowd. "It is a lie," Kyle screamed, his face purple with rage. "She is crazy. Turn it off. Someone turn it off. It is not a lie, Kyle." I said, my voice cutting through his panic, and the reason I know it is not a lie is because Viper Capital does not hold that note anymore. I took a step closer to the edge of the stage, looming over them. As of yesterday morning, the debt was sold. The new creditor is a company called Nemesis Holdings. I paused, letting the name sink in. I saw the recognition in my father's eyes. He knew his Greek mythology. He knew what Nemesis stood for: divine retribution against those who succumb to hubris. "And I am the sole owner of Nemesis Holdings," I declared, the words ringing out like a death knell. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a room where the air had been sucked out. "I bought your debt, Dad. I paid $12 million of my own money to buy the right to stand here tonight and tell you the truth. You are not a king. You are a bankrupt man who tried to commit his own daughter to a mental institution to steal her company and pay off his gambling debts." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the original promissory note. I held it up for everyone to see. "This is your signature, Dad. And this is Kyle's. You promised to pay in full by Monday. But there is a clause on page 4, the acceleration clause. It states that if the debtor is found to be engaging in fraud or material misrepresentation of assets, the loan becomes due immediately." I ripped the paper in half, the sound echoing in the microphone. "Attempting to seize control of the Onyx collection under false pretenses counts as fraud, which means, gentlemen, your time is up." I looked at the security team I had hired, who were waiting in the wings disguised as waiters. I nodded. "This house is now the property of Nemesis Holdings. The foreclosure is effective immediately." Reginald slumped against the podium, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor of the stage, a broken man in a tuxedo that he no longer owned. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. But I felt nothing. The well of sympathy had run dry years ago. "You cannot do this," he whispered, his voice broken. "We are family." "Family," I repeated, looking down at him with cold detachment. "You redefined that word for me a long time ago, Dad. You taught me that family is a transaction. You wanted to trade my freedom for your survival. I just closed the deal." I looked out at the crowd, at the shocked faces of the elite who had come to worship a false idol. "The party is over," I announced. "Please vacate the premises. My security team will escort the former owners off the property now." As the chaos erupted, as Kyle began to scream and charge the stage, only to be intercepted by two large guards, As my mother sat weeping in her chair, I turned and walked away. I did not look back. I walked off the stage past the curtain where Dr. Arrington was supposed to be waiting. He was gone. He had fled the moment the legal documents appeared on the screen. I walked out the back door into the cool night air. The music had stopped. The applause had died. The only sound was the distant sirens of the police cars I had called to pick up Kyle for securities fraud. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like justice. I had walked into that gala as a victim, and I had walked out as the owner of everything they held dear. They had tried to lock me away, but they forgot one crucial thing. You cannot lock up the person who holds the keys to your entire existence. The ballroom erupted into a cacophony of noise that rivaled a riot, as the reality of my announcement settled over the crowd like a heavy blanket of ash. For a moment, time seemed to suspend itself in a chaotic freeze frame. I saw the waiters who had been pouring champagne moments ago freeze with bottles mid-air. I saw the mayor clutch his wife's arm and pull her back as if the stage were radioactive. But the stillness was broken by a guttural scream that did not sound human. It was Kyle. The facade of the sophisticated businessman had shattered completely, leaving behind a feral, terrified creature who knew his life was over. He scrambled up from the floor where he had fallen, pushing past a table and sending crystal glasses crashing to the ground. His face was a mask of purple rage, and his eyes were locked on me with murderous intent. "You witch!" he screamed, his voice cracking under the strain of his fury. "You ruined everything! I will kill you!" He charged up the stairs of the stage, his hands curled into claws reaching for my throat. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. My mother screamed my name, but I did not flinch. I did not step back. I did not even raise my hands to defend myself. I knew something Kyle did not. I knew that the two waiters standing by the curtain were not waiters at all. They were Jerome and Dante, former military contractors I had hired specifically for this moment. Before Kyle could even get within 5 feet of me, Jerome moved with the speed of a striking cobra. He intercepted Kyle mid-stride using the momentum of Kyle's own charge against him. There was a sickening thud as Jerome's shoulder collided with Kyle's chest, followed by the sharp crack of bone meeting the hardwood floor as Dante swept his legs out from under him. Kyle hit the deck hard, his face slamming into the stage at my feet. Before he could scramble up, Dante had a knee in his back, and his arm twisted behind him at an angle that forced a whimper of agony from his lips. I looked down at him, at the man who had called me unstable, who had tried to gaslight me into an asylum. He was pinned to the floor like an insect, his expensive tuxedo tearing at the seams, his face pressed against the dusty wood. "I told you, Kyle," I said, my voice amplified by the microphone still standing perfectly upright. "This property belongs to Nemesis Holdings. You are trespassing." I looked over at my father. Reginald was still sitting on the floor of the stage where he had collapsed. He was staring at Kyle not with concern but with a vacant horror. His brain was trying to process the magnitude of the disaster, but it was misfiring. He looked at the screen behind me, which still displayed the foreclosure notice. He looked at the crowd of his peers who were now filming the scene with their phones. He looked at me, the daughter he had dismissed as weak, standing above them all like a titan. He tried to speak, but only a dry, raspy sound came out. "Simone," he croaked. "Stop this, please. The humiliation. It is enough." I turned to him slowly. "You think this is humiliation, Dad? You think losing a house is the worst thing that can happen to you tonight? You are worried about your reputation. You are worried about what the mayor thinks. But you should be worried about who is sitting at your dinner table." I signaled to the sound engineer in the back of the room. I had paid him $5,000 cash before the party started to follow my instructions, regardless of what Reginald Banks said. "Turn it up," I commanded into the mic. Kyle struggled against Jerome's grip, shouting into the floorboards. "Do not listen to her. She is faking it. It is a deep fake. It is AI." But then his voice filled the room, not from his mouth, but from the massive speakers hanging from the ceiling. It was the recording from the dinner 2 nights ago, clear as a bell. The conversation began mid-sentence. "He is such a pompous old fool." The voice was unmistakably Kyle's. The crowd went silent again, listening with rapt attention to the audio autopsy of the Banks family. Reginald's head snapped up. He recognized the voice. He recognized the tone. It was the voice of the son-in-law he had defended. The son-in-law he had chosen over me. Then came the laughter. High-pitched and cruel. "Chantel. Keys to a sinking ship that we have to bail out. But once we get the liquidity from the accounts, we can stabilize the debt. And then we deal with him. Deal with him. We transfer him to that facility in Macon. Shady Pines. It is state-funded. Cheap. We tell people it is a specialized memory care unit." I watched my father's face as the words washed over him. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The color drained from his skin, leaving him gray and ashen. His mouth opened slightly, his bottom lip trembling. He looked out into the audience, searching for Chantel. She was standing near the front, frozen in the spotlight of public scrutiny. She was shaking her head, mouthing "no, no, no," but the audio continued relentlessly. "And Mom, she goes wherever he goes. Or she can move into a condo. Just make sure I get the jewelry first. Mom has a diamond tennis bracelet I have been eyeing." A collective groan of disgust rippled through the room. People turned to look at Chantel with open hostility. A woman who steals her mother's jewelry while planning to dump her in a state home is a special kind of monster, and even the jaded socialites of Atlanta were repulsed. I looked at my mother Louise. She was standing up now, clutching her wrist where that very bracelet sat. She looked at Chantel with a betrayal so deep it looked like physical pain. Her golden child, her princess, the daughter she had spoiled and protected while neglecting me. The recording ended with the sound of clinking glasses. To the new royalty. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before. It was the silence of a heartbreaking. Reginald slowly turned his head to look at Kyle, who was still pinned on the floor. Then he looked at Chantel. The illusion was gone. The narrative he had built his life around, that he was the patriarch of a loving, loyal dynasty, was dust. He realized in that moment that the only person in the room who had actually tried to save the family honor was the daughter he had tried to destroy. "You knew," Reginald whispered, looking up at me. "You knew they were planning this." "I did," I said, looking down at him. "And I tried to tell you, but you were too busy listening to the man who called you a fool." I heard the heavy thud of doors opening at the back of the ballroom. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, but this time it was not out of respect. It was out of fear. 6 officers in tactical vests walked into the room, followed by 2 men in suits who had the distinct air of federal agents. They were not smiling. They were not there for the hors d'oeuvres. They walked straight toward the stage. The lead agent flashed a badge that caught the stage lights. "Kyle Jensen," he announced, his voice booming without a microphone. "I am Agent Miller with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We have a warrant for your arrest." Kyle stopped struggling. He went limp. Jerome and Dante stepped back, allowing the agents to haul Kyle up from the floor. He looked small now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified weeping of a coward. "On what charges?" he blubbered, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the dust from the floor. "I did not do anything. It was a bad investment. You are being charged with securities fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement." Agent Miller recited, mechanically spinning Kyle around and slamming him against the edge of the stage. "You recruited investors into the Apex Nova cryptocurrency scheme knowing it was fraudulent. You accepted illegal kickbacks totaling $750,000. And we have evidence that you attempted to leverage assets you did not own to cover your losses." The handcuffs clicked shut. The sound was sharp and final. It was the sound of justice snapping into place. Kyle looked frantically around the room, searching for a savior. He looked at Chantel, but she had turned her back on him, sobbing into her hands. He looked at his drinking buddies, but they were all studying the floor, terrified of being associated with him. Finally, his desperate eyes landed on Reginald. "Reginald, please," Kyle begged. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. You gave me permission. We are partners. Help me. Reginald slowly stood up. He was unsteady on his feet. An old man who had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He straightened his tuxedo jacket with trembling hands. He looked at Kyle, the man he had let into his home, the man he had let ruin his life. I do not know you, Reginald said, his voice cold and dead. Kyle screamed as the agents began to drag him away. He kicked and thrashed his shoes, squeaking on the polished floor, leaving scuff marks on the ballroom that no longer belonged to us. Reginald, help me, he screamed. I am family. The agents dragged him down the center aisle. The guests recoiled, pulling their expensive gowns and suits away from him as if his failure was contagious. Cameras flashed, capturing every second of his walk of shame. He was dragged past the ice sculpture that was now melting past the tables of unfinished food and out into the night. I watched him go. I felt no joy, only a deep, exhausting relief. The tumor had been cut out. The surgery was messy and the patient was critical, but the cancer was gone. I looked back at my parents. They stood alone on the stage of their own destruction. My mother was weeping silently, holding onto my father's arm. My father was staring at the empty doorway where Kyle had disappeared. I stepped away from the microphone. My work here was done. I signaled to Jerome and Dante. Secure the building, I told them. Make sure everyone leaves. I turned to walk away, but I felt a hand on my arm. It was my father. His grip was weak, nothing like the iron handshake he used to pride himself on. Simone, he whispered. Where do we go? I looked at him. For a second I saw the father who used to push me on the swing set before he became obsessed with status. But then I saw the man who signed the conservatorship papers. I do not know, Dad, I said, pulling my arm away gently. But you cannot stay here. Nemesis Holdings has a strict no trespassing policy. I walked down the stairs, leaving them standing under the harsh glare of the spotlight, surrounded by the wreckage of their lies. I walked toward the exit, passing the stunned, silent crowd. They parted from me with a newfound respect. They were no longer looking at the crazy daughter. They were looking at the woman who had just brought down the house. And as I stepped out into the cool night air, I knew that for the first time in 35 years, I was finally free. The last guest had finally hurried out of the ballroom, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the noise. The saint. Regis' staff moved quietly in the background, clearing away the untouched lobster and the shattered glass from Kyle's violent exit, but they gave the stage a wide berth. My parents and Chantel were the only ones left sitting in a cluster of folding chairs that a security guard had set up for them near the service exit. It was a pathetic tableau. Reginald Banks, the man who had terrorized my childhood with his demands for perfection, was now slumped over, looking at his hands as if he had never seen them before. My mother Louise was still weeping softly, a sound that used to make me rush to fix things, but now only sounded like background noise. And Chantel sat with her arms crossed, her mascara running down her face in black streaks, looking not at her parents but at her phone, presumably checking if the news of her humiliation had hit the internet yet. I walked over to them. The click of my heels on the floor made them all flinch. I stopped a few feet away, maintaining a distance that was both physical and emotional. I did not sit down. I needed to tower over them. I needed them to understand that the hierarchy of this family had been permanently inverted. So Reginald said, his voice cracked and dry. You have taken the house. You have humiliated us. Is there anything else you want to take, Simone? Maybe the clothes off our backs? I looked at him calmly. I did not take anything, Dad. I bought it. There is a difference. You gambled it away. I salvaged it. And regarding your living situation, I have made arrangements. Chantel looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. You are letting us keep the house? I laughed, a short, dry sound. Absolutely not. The estate will be listed for sale on Monday morning to recoup the $12 million I spent saving you from Viper Capital. However, I am not a monster. I will not leave my elderly parents homeless even if they did try to commit me to an asylum. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a set of keys. I tossed them onto my father's lap. Apartment 4, B at the Gardens Complex in Decatur, I said. It is a two-bedroom unit. Clean, safe, fully furnished. The rent is paid for 1 year. After that, you are on your own. Reginald stared at the keys with horror. Decatur, he whispered. That is working class. It is miles from the club. You are not a member of the club anymore, Dad, I reminded him brutally. You cannot afford the dues. And frankly, after tonight, I doubt they would have you. You are retired now. For real this time. No more schemes, no more loans. You will live on your social security checks. And me? Chantel asked, her voice shrill. Where is my key? I cannot live in a two-bedroom apartment with them. I need my own space. Then I suggest you get a job. Chantel, I said, cold as ice. A job, she repeated as if I had asked her to fly to Mars. Yes, a job. Starbucks is hiring. So is the mall. You are 32 years old. You have a degree in communications that you have never used. It is time to enter the workforce. The allowance is gone. The credit cards are canceled. The free ride ends tonight. But I have a brand to maintain, she screeched, standing up. I am an influencer. I cannot be seen working at a coffee shop. Your brand is built on a lie, I shot back. And honestly, Chantel, after that recording of you planning to steal Mom's jewelry gets circulated, I think your follower count is going to drop to 0. You are toxic, and nobody wants to sponsor a thief. She opened her mouth to argue, but then closed it, realizing for the first time in her life that there was no one left to bail her out. Kyle was in a holding cell. Dad was broke. Mom was powerless. She was finally just like everyone else. I looked at my mother. She had stopped crying and was looking at me with a strange expression. It wasn't anger, it was almost respect. Or maybe just fear. I will send a moving truck tomorrow morning, I said to her. Pack what you need. Clothes, personal items, photos. Leave the furniture. Leave the art. And Mom, leave the jewelry. It is part of the asset seizure. She nodded slowly, touching her bare wrist where the bracelet used to be. I understand, Simone. I turned to leave. Simone, my father called out. I stopped, but I did not turn around. Why, he asked, his voice trembling. Why did you not just let them take the house? Why did you pay the 12 million? You hate us. I paused, thinking about the answer. Because I wanted you to know, I said over my shoulder. I wanted you to know that the daughter you threw away was the only one who could afford to buy you. I walked out of the service exit, leaving them to argue over the keys to a two-bedroom apartment in Decatur. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind me, sealing off the past. I walked down the long concrete corridor that led to the valet parking area. My body felt light. The tension that had lived in my shoulders for 2 years, the constant hum of anxiety that I wasn't good enough, it was all gone. It had evaporated under the heat of the stage lights. I stepped out into the cool Atlanta night. The air smelled of rain and jasmine. The valet was busy bringing cars around for the few straggling guests, but I did not head for my Mercedes. I looked toward the curb where a sensible dark blue sedan was parked with the engine running. David stepped out of the car before I even reached the sidewalk. He looked nothing like the men inside the ballroom. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt and slacks. He didn't have the polished veneer of a shark. He had the warm, solid presence of a man who builds things that last. He was an architect not just of buildings, but of the life we had created together, a life based on honesty and mutual respect. He walked toward me, his eyes scanning my face, searching for any cracks in the armor. Is it done? He asked softly. I nodded, my throat suddenly tight. It is done. Kyle is in custody. They have the keys to the apartment. David didn't ask about the money. He didn't ask about the house or the company or the scandal. He simply opened his arms. I stepped into his embrace, and for the first time in 48 hours, I let go. I buried my face in his chest, smelling the clean scent of soap and cedar. He wrapped his arms around me, creating a shield against the world. I didn't cry. I was done crying. I just breathed. I felt his hand stroking my hair, a gesture of pure, unadulterated affection that demanded nothing in return. "I am proud of you, Simone," he whispered into my ear. "Not because you won, but because you stood up." I pulled back slightly, looking up at him. "I spent $12 million of our savings, David. That was the money for the expansion, for the lake house." David smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in that way I loved. "We can make more money," he said, shrugging. "We cannot make another you. You bought your freedom, Simone. That is a bargain at twice the price." He opened the car door for me. I slid into the passenger seat. It wasn't a limousine. It wasn't a luxury SUV with heated massage seats. It was just a car. But as David got in and started the engine, I realized it felt more luxurious than any vehicle my father had ever owned because it was paid for with honest work and driven by a man who actually loved me. "Let us go home," I said. David took my hand and squeezed it. "Home sounds good." As we drove away from the St. Regis, I watched the hotel disappear in the rearview mirror. It looked like a glittering castle from a distance, but I knew it was just a building full of empty people trying to impress each other. We merged onto the highway, heading toward the skyline of downtown Atlanta. In the distance, I could see the silhouette of the Onyx Collection Tower rising above the city. The lights were on in the penthouse office, my office. For years, I had looked at that building and felt a sense of imposter syndrome. I felt like I was just holding the seat warm until my father or Kyle decided to take it from me. I felt like I had to apologize for my success to dim my light so it wouldn't outshine my sister. But tonight, looking at that tower against the midnight sky, I felt something different. I felt ownership. I had faced the monsters under my bed and I had turned on the lights. I had stopped waiting for an apology that would never come, and instead, I had created my own closure. My father had tried to use the law to lock me away, to strip me of my agency and my voice. He thought that because he gave me life, he owned my life. But he was wrong. Family is not a suicide pact. It is not a debt you pay with your soul. I looked at David driving calmly beside me. I thought about the Sunday dinners we would have in the future. They wouldn't be in a mansion in Buckhead. They would be in our home. There wouldn't be expensive wine and passive-aggressive insults. There would be laughter. There would be peace. And there would be no one there who secretly hoped I would fail. I touched the window glass, watching the city blur by. I had lost a father, a mother, and a sister tonight. By all standard definitions, it was a tragedy. But as the miles put distance between me and the wreckage of the Banks estate, I realized it wasn't a loss at all. It was a shedding of dead weight. I was Simone Banks. I was the CEO of the Onyx Collection. I was the owner of Nemesis Holdings. And for the first time in my entire life, I was free. If you have ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save yourself, let me know in the comments below. It is the hardest thing you will ever do, but I promise you on the other side of that, guilt is a freedom you cannot imagine. Please like and subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. My name is Simone, and this is my new beginning. Simone's journey teaches us a brutal but necessary truth: sharing DNA does not grant anyone a license to destroy your spirit or your future. We often cling to toxic family dynamics out of obligation, hoping our success will finally earn their love. But as Simone discovered, you cannot buy respect from those committed to using you. True freedom begins the moment you stop seeking validation from people who are only capable of taking. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to fire your family and hire your own peace of mind. If you have ever had to build your own table because your family wouldn't give you a seat, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of unapologetic resilience.